ultimately, if you're trying to make a game, then it's not just about the art and trying to make it look as good as possible. There's other people in the team who are going to be game designers, programmers, producers, etc., who are just going, we've got to make this be as fun as possible as well. Crunch is when you have to do it and you're starting to get to the point at which you're damaging life, you're sleep deprived, all those kinds of things. If you put all these extra hours in, you're only 50% as efficient. But if you put lots and lots and lots and lots of hours in, that 50% will still add up to getting your thing out on time. But is that right? Is that what people should be doing? Just because, in most cases, because they're passionate. 95% of people in games are doing this because they really want to make games and they love it and they wouldn't want to do anything else. And yeah, sure, they could go and get a much more sensible job and less stress and whatever, but actually they love it. But don't abuse that. Don't take advantage of that passion.
James, welcome to the podcast.
It's a pleasure. Glad to be here.
So over the last 25 years, you've been building multiple game studios across various different business models and industry cycles. Today, besides just learning more about you and your journey, I'd really love to talk about what it means to build a game studio and what it means to lead a team and have a vision for an entire group of people.
Happy to tell you as much as I possibly can. I'm sure people have done it in lots of different ways. I'll tell you my story.
So what originally pulled you into the games industry?
God, now that's going back a bit. So I suppose games, we were fortunate that my grandfather bought and my father bought some computers for my older brother, 2 years older. And I wasn't, I was too young to really know what was going on. And he got into programming in the early 80s. And was, making things that were fascinating. And I just watched, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, move on a bit later, when we had like a home computer that could play games and such. I was literally sat on the end of the bed reading out code from magazines. And then on occasion, we would want to alter the graphics. So I would just make out some pixel graphics on some graph paper and then read that out, ones and zeros, and eventually color and all this kind of stuff. My brother was always a bit of a rebel or wanted to do things differently. So everybody else had at that point, like Spectrums and Commodore 64s. And we had Oric and Amstrad. So we were all different, which obviously meant a lot of my friends had all these games and were swapping them around. And I had to go around their houses to play some of the games because they didn't exist on our systems. Anyway, so then I was playing games a lot, playing things like Elite. God, that was one of the biggest ones, but, Jet Set Willy and lots of classic games on the computers that we could. There was a game that I really liked called 3D Star Strike, which is effectively Star Wars, the arcade game, which I just used to enjoy a lot. And so anyway, play games, but then didn't really think about making them for a long time. And then I went to university to study electronics, because that was sort of my destiny and the way things that I was interested in and felt that was the right thing to do. But it was a course with electronics, with computing and business. And I sort of, kept it all up, but started to dabble with the computing side, but really sort of slightly went off the electronics. But during that period, getting into games more, not just computer games, but I ran the role-playing and Wargaming club and the computer games club at uni and a mixture of games. So games was nearly my all day, every day. And trying to supposedly think about my academic courses, but I kept on getting distracted by sitting at the back and reading some rule book about something or thinking about Wing Commander or, it doesn't matter, so there's all kinds of things going on. And I remember playing Eye of the Beholder on the lab computers. Anyway, moving on, one of the guys in a house share had an Amiga, and he had various demo discs, and one of them had a 3D art package on it. And I just sat down one afternoon when we, weren't in lectures and just made stuff. And because I guess I was quite good at what used to be called technical drawing at school, or maybe because I'm a model maker and stuff, as you can see from the things behind me, it was easy. It's just easy. I just made stuff, and the guys in the house just went and watched me and said, "How are you doing that?" I was like, "I just do it." And I made uh, X-wings and AT-ATs and things like that. Just that was Starship Enterprises, you name it, I made. And they just went, "You're really good at this." And then a thing popped into my head. It's like, I wonder if I could do this as a job. I didn't take it that seriously for a while. Then carried on studies, did a bit more, etc. And then in my final year, I just got better and better at it, did more. But then to break into games was interesting. I tried initially, but at that point, there was still, most things were pixel art. Because a lot of things were, there wasn't much 3D power in effectively the consoles at the time. Some in PCs, but not much in consoles. So I tried doing pixel art, but I was rubbish, right? So I just can't do pixel art. I tried my best, but it just wasn't happening. So I then thought, well, I'll try and apply for 3D. I applied everywhere, but the only places where I could get any interest was flight sim studios, because flight sims were 3D and were using 3D. And there was a few flight sim companies in the UK, and one of them employed me in Godalming. It's a company called Simis. And it was a small studio. I think there was only like 13, 14 people there at the time. And they were making flight sims. And that was my start. That was my in via flight sims, not games. I mean, they're games, right? It's not hardcore flight sims, but that studio, I've got everything to thank, because that was my into the industry. Doing 3D, being a 3D artist on flight sims. The thing was, quite quickly. So I'm rabbiting on about this long story. Hopefully you'll get the general idea of the journey. But quite quickly, I think partly because of my personality, I was recognized as somebody who could sort of run the team that I was within. And the bosses recognized that. And within sort of 6 months, I was actually leading that little team that was making a helicopter sim. And actually sort of running this tiny team and meeting the producers at the publisher and all that kind of thing quite quickly. Partly personality, right? So it's a mixture. And I think some of the management things I'd done and some of the project management things I'd done at uni helped. And also massive enthusiasm and passion. And I was a bit of, not just a 3D artist, I was a bit technical as well. So I could always have a bit of a chat with the programmers and try and push things forward in terms of what's possible. Anyway, I'll come to the end of this bit of the story soon enough. But the thing was that then IDOS was formed, which IDOS was a collection of a whole bunch of game studios and publishers. Domark and was it US Gold, and they were sub part of the publishing. And then development wise, you had Deep Red, you had us, you had Core Design, which is going to be the most famous one, and that all became IDOS. And then it changed to a games company, and so that was the beginning of my games company, games, not flight sims, but actually games journey from that point onwards.
How did the industry feel at that point? Because you mentioned it was going from 2D to 3D. Was it at an inflection point? Did games feel like it could become like a proper industry back then? I'm just trying to understand what it felt like, because it felt like maybe a lot of R&D, a lot of like, we don't know what it can be in 5 years.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. So, I mean, it was definitely feeling like an industry then, right? In the mid 90s, we're talking like 96-ish, something like that. It definitely was an industry by then. I think, a few years earlier, then it was definitely coming of age and becoming a thing. I mean, not comparable to today, but like still there was, basically the publishers had become, the gatekeeper to the public and all that kind of thing. We'd gone from the selling of cassette tapes by indie developers in shops and all that kind of thing, moved to sort of everything running through a publisher. But the mad thing I tell people today, and funny enough, I was talking to one of my colleagues who's actually now over 60 yesterday, and we were discussing how, probably the oldest person in the industry might have been 35. The whole, the entire global games industry, maybe 40. Don't know. If you're lucky, and generally, not entirely, but quite male dominated. And then some people were making insane amounts of money. It was quite crazy and new and so young. And people are like, okay, well, how does it compare to music and movies and book publishing and things like that? They've had time to mature. At that time, we were very immature. The industry was very immature. From my point of view, I was very young and green, and I was just looking at this crazy thing happening around me and, just thinking how sort of immature it was at the time. And I'm glad we're maturing hard now and have matured well, which is good. But looking back, it was a bunch of kids running around, just trying to work it all out, I think, with some people steering it from the very, very top who are a bit more mature, but it was coming of age. Now, as on regards 3D, totally. It was the birth of the graphics cards. So because we'd done 3D and because of my boss's relationship with some of the 3D card manufacturers, we had a really early 3D cards. So we were doing 3D accelerated stuff whilst lots of people were still trying to transition into that. So some people were doing very basic 3D. We had 3D that looked actually really good for its time. I mean, if I look back now, it's probably awful, but we were pushing the boundaries on 3D, and that was really fascinating. I loved that, right? That was really what that appeals to me as somebody who's curious and loves pushing boundaries and understanding tech. And at the time, being an artist who was talking to programmers, I mean, I remember one of the things I was talking to one of the founders of the company about how we could do glass. And we were like, nobody's really done glass. Let's try and work out how we can do glass, because I've got a helicopter and I want to be able to see out of the window, not through nothing, which was clever at the time to actually do nothing in a texture, but actually have something that's sort of there, basically glass. And that was really interesting, pushing those things at the time. And then it was like, how do you make something glow? How that was all fascinating. But yeah, we were definitely, things were changing. And then you think about 3D consoles were just a moment away, like effectively PlayStation 1 times.
Yeah. What I think is really cool is that you guys were trying to figure out simulation. It was a new thing. Like the idea that I can simulate a helicopter, or I can simulate being in an airplane, or I can simulate being up 50,000 feet in the sky. That is something that prior to then wasn't. It was all R&D. It was all a new thing of possibilities. Like, where can this technology go? I can feel like there was this excitement back then to just using 3D graphics to create these worlds. You were world building at a time when everything was 2D, like Space Invaders. Not all that far back then, but I know that all the space games I've been reading was because there simply wasn't the processing power to do more complicated games. So you needed a blank screen, and you just had these spaceships shooting, and that's kind of where the industry was. And then the simulation was like the next big step. Like that's in a lot of ways.
Simulation, there were people doing flight sims for a very long time, getting a simulation as they can, but it's relatively hardcore. What's interesting is when people said, I mean, there was always driving games, but they were faking it. But when you had good 3D, how do you make a good 3D driving game that is then what was interesting at that sort of inflection point was people using 3D, let's call it for the masses, right? Star Fox was obviously one of the early ones where they actually had a 3D cartridge and it's 3D, and people are like, oh my God, it's 3D. And they were looking into the world and so on, rather than it being a faked 3D, like, an old Space Harrier or something, or an old racing game, into true 3D. And then people using the 3D for something that everybody would enjoy. I mean, I remember experimenting with some of the old flight sim tech, turning it into a game where we were racing tanks. So it's like, we've got some tanks, we've got this terrain system. Why don't we make it a game which is like silly about racing super deformed tanks? We made this prototype up, and then actually did get picked up and made into a thing. And of course, space games made sense because we'd made flight sims and people like space sims, so there were space sims going on. And then games like Descent, we made a game similar to a Descent game, and Descent was real 3D, where you're a spaceship flying through tunnels inside a bigger spaceship, things like that. Embracing 3D games, not sims, but games everybody can enjoy, rather than just people who wanted to be in a tornado or an F-16. So we were definitely in a transition point, I'd say, there. And again, like I say, the 3D consoles started to appear, and then people were using 3D even more for the masses. Those early games on PlayStation 1 blew everybody away, and were much loved, and have created franchises to this day. Metal Gear and Gran Turismo to this very day, for example.
Are there still truths that hold up today? So obviously, there's been a lot of changes in 3D. We've taken incredible leaps forward. If you look, even like GTA 6 coming out, it's going to be absolutely incredible. But what I'm wondering, if from your perspective, what are the things that have stayed the same in terms of building these games? Like
a lot of it. So there's technology jumps. I'll be getting sort of relatively hardcore, which is interesting because I sort of put my Wacom pen down in 2001. I think was the last art that I really did that went in a game. Because to sort of fill in a bit of background, I was sort of lead art, team lead, and then leading multiple games, leading the R&D department, which was R&D there was not the tech R&D, but the games R&D, like thinking of ideas, basically. Then popping back to a game, make a game, then go back to R&D, think of new games, then make a game, and things like that. And we were doing a lot of, sometimes it would be our idea, sometimes it would be approached to make a thing. So that went on for a long period of time. I'd grown down that route of sort of growing with the team. The studio was growing hard. Like there's changes in the bosses had raised more money, etc., etc. So we were growing, and we were doing bigger and bigger and more complex games in more complex 3D. But during that, there were some technology changes, and like and that sounds hilarious when I think back about like bump mapping was super exciting. Like just looking little texture on the texture, things like that. Then I probably aged out of art, or like stopped doing art around normal mapping. Normal mapping is much more realistic, effectively bump mapping. So like it's a flat surface, but then the light goes around and actually it looks like it's got 3D because you've got true 3D information baked into it and stuff. And that's, to this day, still a great deal of what you see, and then more and more technology leaps. So basically that has made games more and more and more realistic, or the possibility of doing more and more unusual things. But most of that push was towards realism. And I think sort of what's very interesting about today is the next generation of players' attitude towards realism is very, very interesting. Very interesting, I feel, is that things are changing, have changed, will change further, I think, is that, and I'll use my kids quite a few examples because they're of certain different ages. So let's say my oldest kid is sort of coming up to his mid-20s. When he was growing up, he carried on the journey that, let's say, was almost like my journey, which is I want more power because I want it to look more realistic. I want more power to more realistic. I want the latest console. I want the latest PC because I want it to look more realistic. And that's true. And for a lot of people, that's still true. But there's a lot of people now coming up who go, actually, I don't care. I don't need to see the veins in the eyeball of like the lead character in this AAA game, right? It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter to them. And that's obviously changing things because a lot of people have put a lot of serious money in impressing gamers to buy new consoles, new graphics cards, better PCs, their game on the back of it just looking like a movie, like, or real or something. And actually, there's more and more gamers now who are going, actually, I don't care if it looks like, and massively ironically and hilariously, a game from 1996. I don't care if it looks like Quake. If it's fun, and I'm having fun with my friends, especially, if it's well art directed, well put together. It's good. Plus, it's really fun. Okay, and that's the attitude of my youngest, who's nearly, getting up nearly 10 years younger. Is he's like, I don't care. I don't care. I show him the latest, greatest, and he goes, yeah. And there's more of that around than ever, which is changing things and obviously changing the buying public's attitude. So we've gone through this interesting 3D journey to nearly, well, there's always a better, but like nearly realistic. And then something's changed, right? Things have changed due to many things, many inputs, I think.
I wonder why that is, because when I was a kid, I can remember myself saying, look at the graphics. The graphics are so much better. Like just the word graphics reminds me of when I was a kid and the new console would come out, or the next FIFA or whatever kind of game, the next GTA, whatever it was. I was always thinking the graphics, it looks so good. It looks so real. I'm wondering if that was maybe more influenced by the marketing of the game at the time, because there were so many kind of leaps and bounds in graphical processing that like every other year, just there was a significant jump upwards, or if that's just kind of what your generation, my generation, we just looked for in games. And now that we've kind of plateaued a bit, it's all about the gameplay. It's all about playing with other people. It's all about more, you can play Roblox, you can play old school RuneScape, you can play, it doesn't matter, because like you just want to play the game. Like it's not so much about having the best graphics.
Yeah. It's probably many things, right? What I think it was amazing for us to go on that journey, right? So we went on that journey from A to B, and I remember when it looked like, Final Fantasy VII, and went, wow, if I look back at that, they're just some quite simple things moving around. Much loved, wonderful game, but like the actual graphics quite simple. And we went on that journey, and we can look at, Final Fantasy Remake and go, wow, that's amazing. If the journey is more flat, is it so interesting? Maybe that's a thing. Maybe that's a thing. Cost, literal cost, like people going, I don't know whether I want to spend that money. Maybe that's a thing. And then, of course, you mentioned one of the games there, Roblox, right? So Roblox and Minecraft have been a huge influence on people. And, I can definitely see that in my youngest, where he's like, actually, I'm having lots of fun. What am I ultimately doing here is that I want to, and this is one of the things that I chat about a lot these days, is that I think, what do we do as games makers? We ultimately create escapism. And we entertain. We're entertainers, but what does entertainment do? Entertainment allows you to escape. It's almost like the pinnacle. It's the top of the pyramid. Same for other mediums, right, as well. So what provides that escapism? Does the graphics help? But actually escapism can come regardless of that, right? Like we had a whale of a time playing Vampire Survivors and talking about Vampire Survivors, and it upset a lot of people because it's winning awards, but it doesn't look like a AAA game, right? But actually the markets, people have changed, I think, a lot. Now, there's a lot of games that aren't trying to be real. They're trying to be high quality, but not real, right? There's an interesting bit in between where you've got Mario, right? It's not very real, but it's trying to be high quality. I think that has a slightly different ding on the brain about what it's trying to achieve, right? And that's quite interesting. It's like you've got something that looks good versus trying to be real. But anyway, it's like I said, it's a very interesting topic about like the changing market and the changing landscape. And we could probably talk about that a lot as well, easily.
I think a lot of kids nowadays, in general, are looking for coherent art direction. Like the idea that realism isn't everything, that you're not looking for the best graphics, the eye pope, the vein in the eye bulb. You don't need any of that stuff, because at the end of the day, you're looking for something that feels like home, that feels like there's a lot of thought into it. That I think the word coherent is really strong, because you want to feel a style across what you're playing.
Yeah. Style's a good word. Style's a good word, actually, because I think that there's definitely, if I look at some of the games that my youngest plays, and like I said, my oldest, actually, he's playing lots of different games now and isn't necessarily on the sort of power curve anymore, because it's changing. And if you look at the games that they love a lot, and that, lots of other people I know and myself, it's well directed, it's well made, It's got strong style. The style's consistent. It fits with the gameplay. It all comes together, and that could be the smallest sort of, swiftly made indie game. But as long as that's got a bunch of those things, it's got a real chance, and that makes a big, big, big difference. And it's not about that tiny team having to go, which was the case in the past. It's like, how do we get as close as we can to realism with our tiny team and tiny budget? Which, if you think about it, was there for a while, occasionally, and it wasn't until really, when I think about it, the birth of sort of XBLA, which was part of my journey, which we can get back to, that actually things started to flip again and change, right? The sort of the rise of the indie. Before that, a lot, not in everybody, but a lot of everything was like, God, with our budget, how do we get close to real? How do we get close to real? How do we do real? Right. And then there's an opportunity for something else to come back, right? Because it was there at the beginning, as we know, in the early industry, something else to come back, which isn't about real, and it find its place. So yeah, I agree. It's fascinating how things have potentially gone back in time, but maybe I think that's unfair. I think we're just in a new time.
I think it's become really easy to become hyper real in the sense that now you can load up Unreal or Unity, you can get the textures that you want, you can create these like base games that on paper have great graphics, but don't have that thought behind them, don't have that kind of effort to make, again, that style, that coherency. And so you get these really powerful games, but it feels like companies back then, when they were trying to make something look real, they were putting in immense effort to do so. And nowadays it just feels like, let's add these plugins, these textures. I'm wondering if my hunch there is right. It just feels like it's more accessible today to make a
it's definitely more accessible. Yeah, I mean, people can go on the asset store. The engines can do insanely good things, right? But ultimately, if you're trying to make a game, then it's not just about the art and trying to make it look as good as possible. There's other people in the team who are going to be game designers, programmers, producers, etc., who are just going, we've got to make this be as fun as possible as well. Now, there have been famous examples where basically it's like, let's just make it look as realistic as possible. I will do some very, very weak gameplay, and it can gain strong interest, because that is a way of gaining interest. And there's been various blips of that, and they still happen, and you see them happen where it's like, oh my God, this is really weak. But maybe it gains enormous amounts of wish list these days, etc., because it looks like it's got everything. But actually, when they finally release or whatever, it's like, no, it's vacuous, it's empty. But it looks really good because, like you say, you can actually get to a very high level of real look, because you can actually purchase a lot of the things that make something look real and use an engine that puts those things together and makes it look very real. So yeah, and that's potentially an opportunity for some people. You still got to make a game, still be fun, because players eventually will see through that. And they do, and it's quite famously recorded when that stuff happens.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that we're seeing all kinds of everything and all kinds of styles, and people can have anything, almost anything they can imagine across the spectrum is available to them. They can have their ultra realistic whichever, and then they can play something back to pixel art and have a great deal of fun with that. And isn't that wonderful, right? We're not restricted. There was a time, let's say it was the late 90s, early 2000s, when I'd go to a pitching event, and there was like, I don't know, I'm probably exaggerating slightly, but 5 or 6 genres. And the publishers wanted 5 or 6 genres. You would pitch one of the 5 or 6 genres, and that's how it worked for a while. And it's not boring, but it was certainly more of we've all got this worked out. This is what gamers want. They want first-person shooters, third-person action adventures, a racing game, it's like, they'll want one of those. What have you got? What are you making? What could you do? And by the way, obviously, it's all got to look as realistic as possible, apart from a few different things. And that was it for a bit there, again, until it changed in that period, when when digital distribution came in, massively changed everything.
Really? How did digital distribution change in what
So,
way?
so I'll tell you. I'll use my story to talk about it, because actually, what if I could carry on with this building studio? So still, I was within this part of. Well, we'd actually the bosses had bought the studio back off of IDOS somewhere along that journey. I'll get into all the details, and then we'd continued to grow, and that was Kuju Entertainment, right? And I was part of Kuju Entertainment. By this time, it was got so big that there was studios, around the world and across the UK. Had grown really, really big. Very proud of what was created by everybody involved. And I was running the one which was in Godalming still, right? And, we'd moved down the road, but still in Godalming. I was not running. I was part of that studio. And then as a producer, executive producer, and then eventually sort of running that studio over time. However, just about that time, we'd had a big project cancelled. Things were changing across the business. So, all power to my boss at the time. He'd always been wanting to see if there was a way to not have to have everything go through publishers. XBLA was just happening, and they said, why don't you take some of the people after the studio was shrinking, to take some of those people. You've got a project running at the moment, rehouse yourself, and then see if we can do projects which are on these new self-publishing platforms. Steam starting to be a thing. It's amazing to think of this as all going back then. Digital distribution was like a new buzzword. It's like, oh, digital distribution, what's that? Who's doing that? How's that going to work? Lots of arguments about box products will never go away. Don't you worry. So this digital distribution, or maybe it's so. Some people said it's a flash in a pan. I still know some of those people. It's quite funny. They said, oh, nah, it'll go away and they'll be back to box soon. Don't worry. Amazing. And we started a brand new small studio called doublesix Games. So we branded it, started with, I think there was like 9 of us. And we were effectively a little indie sponsored by a bigger studio, right? So there was some money going into it, but I've started to go out to talk to people about raising money to be effectively project finance into games, right? And then we would publish them. And XBLA, the initial platforms actually were Steam, and Sony would allow us to direct publish. And they just started PSN. I was working with a guy in the UK Sony office, and PSN was nothing. Right? We were working out what PSN would be, and working together. And we were finishing off a game that we'd worked on which was Geometry Wars Galaxies for the Wii and the DS. And then we were actually moved into the self-publishing era. And the first game we made was a game called Burn Zombie Burn, which, if you look at what we'd done before, was a natural progression. But effectively, it was an indie game, right? This was us self-publishing on these new platforms. Initially, PlayStation for Burn Zombie Burn. And just going direct to consumer and collecting the revenue direct to us, and working out how to publish, right? We'd never published, but like working out how to publish. What does that mean? What do we do? Who should we talk to? Should we go to shows? Let's go to shows. Let's put on a show. All that kind of stuff, which was all starting to move from pure dev to dev publisher, dev/publisher.
Yeah, you're effectively cutting out the middleman by going into digital distribution, right? But you have to learn what it means to get the boxes, create the CDs. I mean, that's the side of publishing, in the sense of getting the game out. Would you call publishing as in getting the game? That's a good question. When it comes to publishing games, what is the true definition? Like, is that just making sure players get the box, they can find it, they can find the digital links for it? What does it mean to publish, I guess?
Well, I suppose then, before that, or around that time, obviously publishing involved distribution. Distribution meant something that basically the average developer or average people just couldn't do, because it involves physical things, going in trucks, driving to stores, negotiating with stores, setting prices, setting position in shops. Right? It's so much more complicated. There are digital analogies for that, but it's way simpler. right? It's way simpler. You know, and cheaper, much, 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 much cheaper. So we were going, well, okay, what's the definition of publishing? One of the biggest things, of course, one of the biggest things is everybody knowing that your game exists and wanting to buy it, right? Marketing, right? So effectively marketing, marketing, marketing. And within that, you've got subsets of PR and so on. But there are other things like checking the game is good enough to go to market. So a big thing about publishers often do is the final QA. There's localization. There is talking with platforms, although back then we talked direct to the platforms, so that's that kind of thing. So there are publisher services, and it varies. But one of the biggest things, of course, is the marketing, right? And being experts in that. And what we took on for a while, and I'll still happily do it again because it's kind of fun and interesting, but does take expertise, time, and money, and all that kind of thing. It was basically, how do we let the player know our game exists? How do we show off this game? How do we create the key art that's going to be exciting? All those kind of things, which often developers will say, look, we'll just make a really, really solid game. I don't know how to create a really good poster, a really good piece of text that people will read and want to buy and all that kind of stuff. But we've all been giving it a go, and lots of people have been self-publishing since that time. But it was fun at those days because, as I said, those platforms were evolving. I mean, XBLA initially, only the biggest publishers could publish on it, so there was still a gate. But then that was changing. There's lots of conversations around that, so people could be developers and publish. Sony was letting us in as forming the store, and we were discussing how the store was. And if you imagine, there wasn't much to buy. So actually, you weren't pushing against a very hard door, right? People wanted content. And when we got to the point at which we grew as doublesix, and then I got to the point at which I could effectively buy doublesix from Kuju Entertainment, which likes to buy it from that group. That's what I did, right? And then I raised some money from one of the people who was funding one of the games that we were working on, and then went on this journey of not being within a group, which has there was definitely some learning experiences there, and actually then had my own company where I was, the boss. With all the responsibilities that entails, rather than a studio head. And it definitely is a different thing, different beast. At the same time, digital distribution was growing a bit. Steam started to happen, and we had this PC game. And I tell people, and they just go, oh my God, I can't believe it. We had a direct line to Valve. And also, when we came out, I think there was only 2 games in that 2-week period. 2. And therefore, what were they going to put on the front? Our game, because there's nothing else coming out. Imagine that. Imagine
Incredible
that world.
Timing. Yeah.
I know people go, I'm so jealous. But obviously there were less people buying at the time and things like that. But it meant that it was definitely easier to market and be a self-publisher because you're pushing. You didn't have to push quite as hard or be really, really, really think about how you're going to break through like we do today. So, it's still work, still some hard work, and we definitely made some mistakes and spent, we got a little stand at Gamescom and things like that. It was really good fun. We drove the truck from the UK all the way to Gamescom full of our Strike Suit Zero stuff. We created a stand and we put a fog machine, and, we were like, we're like a publisher. We were like a publisher, but did it actually sell any copies? I don't know. It's good for getting some press people around and things like that. But it's undeniable that it helped all the things we did, but you don't know quite what was effective and what was well spent and all that kind of thing. And obviously that does change even today. But yeah, that was still part of the sort of growth journey, because by then we were definitely our own sort of indie studio and by then, PSN had got mature. XBLA is now, pretty big, and Steam is starting to grow fast. And that was, we're getting 2012, 2013 by then. and the next generation of consoles were coming out and things like that. But that was definitely another period of growth and learning for me as well at that time.
Would you say it's easier to self-publish today with the whole digital distribution? I mean, I haven't bought a physical box for a game in a long time now. I used to do it all the time. So I'm wondering, for anyone listening in, is this a better time to just kind of create your own game and just publish it yourself?
Well, okay, because you've asked two questions there. Create your own game and publish it are two different things. So obviously, to answer your first one, create your own game. In a way, it is the better time because there's so many possibilities, but also it's a very hard time because the market is so saturated with the fact that it's so possible, right? And that's problematic. And as we talked about earlier, the market's changing. So you've got saturated market, changing tastes. There's always been a lot of luck in this business, right? There's always been a lot of luck. You could be the person who published on the same day as Helldivers came out, and you didn't know, right? And you just go, I made a really good game, and nobody did nothing, right?
Time and place.
Time. It's a factor, right? You create your own luck. You have to work hard to do the best you can, but there's always a bit of luck in there, right? There's still, you can't fully create your luck because there's still luck, right? So now, is it the best time to self-publish? I actually think that the new breed of publishers, and that has changed a lot over time as well. The new breed of publishers are doing things very differently. I remember when people started to talk about much more equitable deals. There's a point where to get a game published, you were effectively taking the development advance, but the odds of you making royalties were incredibly low, right? And also you wouldn't make royalties from the start, et cetera, and you'd have to give away the IP. Now, generally, not all the time, you keep the IP, and it's a much more equitable deal, right? You might not get Unit 1, but if you've got the game quite far, you might get royalties from the start. Unthinkable. God, if I went back in time to some of the early publishers said in 10 years' time, or 15 years' time, deals will look like this. I'd say, no, it won't look like that.
Wait, so publishers would take the IP? Like back in the day, like you'd make your own game and then they'd be like, this is 100%. A great game, I love it, but now it's going to be ours and we're going to give you revenue share. Yeah,
that's the way it was.
It just seems like such a wild thing to me. Yeah, I get it.
But
it's the same with albums, right? With music.
It's the opposite, right? It's just like, well, if I go to one of these big publishers and I say, I've got this great idea, bear in mind, you wouldn't at that point have developed it as far at the point at which you got a deal. Right? So that's quite an important differentiating factor, and we'll get to that, is that basically, you would go to that person, you'd strike a deal, they would give you the opportunity to make the game of your dreams or something that you discussed between you, but like you'd thought of it and you'd thought of like this wacky thing and, the idea and whatever else it was and thought of the name and so on. But as part of that, you would transfer the IP ownership over as part of the deal. Now, what would then happen is, as that game makes money, there'll be a point in time that's agreed where, let's say, it's made double all its costs. Then you might start to see royalties. But obviously, that means that you've had to make a success. And some games did and make successes and made their founders and owners great money. But when you get to a point at which now you're the IP owner and you've got a deal which is, because you've advanced the game quite far before the publishing deal is put in place, you are effectively earning revenue from the sales from a much earlier stage. And that's a modern publisher. And modern publishers obviously have very different attitudes about how to publish as well, of course, because that's changed. Like the equivalent of what it used to be to have a chat with a game store and say, could I have the window? And they'd say, well, that's going to cost you money. Could I position my game near the front, near the charts? Yeah, well, that's going to cost you money, all that kind of stuff. That sort of still exists, or existed. I don't know exactly because I haven't touched it in a while, on some of the stores. But obviously Steam is algorithm driven, with some things which effectively are related to Steam going, well, we know this is going to be big and we care, and putting things up and things like that. But that relationship's changed as well, right? And in how you work with a store, but the store, working with a store, working how to get yourselves well positioned on the store, giving yourselves the best possibility. Publishers talk about that a great deal because obviously that hugely matters. Like, people working out when, and obviously these things change all the time, and we're talking specifically about Steam, like if I put my demo up just before Next Fest by this amount of time, this thing will happen that algorithmically we've spotted that it makes you go up the store just at the point at which Next Fest hits. And then it's almost like playing a game, because gamers going to game, right? Gamers going to game. So publishers are gaming the store, and you can imagine Valve at the other end going, I see what they did there. Quick, let's just nerf that. They're almost rebalancing like a game. They've seen an exploit. They're cheesing the store, and then they rebalance it. So there's that going on. But but is it better to publish these days than it was self-published than it was these before? Yes, because of the deals you can get and the possibilities. Now, is it easy? No. And is it going to work? Who knows? You could put lots and lots of time and effort, and there's lots of partners you can work with these days, by the way. We never did it always completely on our own. We worked with people who we knew who were contracted experts and things like that. So you can contract an expert. You don't have to do it all on your own. You can have a, PR agency. You can go all the way to have a marketing agency. You can have people who help you go through that. But you are you're the publisher of record, right? So you're collecting the revenue from the start, right? And it's all on you. It's all on you. And that was always the thing I liked, right? Because I'm a bit of a control freak, I'll admit it, is that if it goes wrong, you've got nobody else to blame. You can't go, the publisher messed up, right? It's not. It's something went wrong with you and or luck, right? The fates are the fates, right? You can still blame the fate. Right? You can still say, we did everything. We were perfect, but we came out on when this hit the news, and something happened, and so-and-so released their game exactly the same day, or the algorithm changed, which meant the very clever thing we thought of meant that this happened, or something, right? There's always a chance that something will just happen.
So it's easier to self-publish. On one hand, you get more favorable deals today.
Yep.
But on the other hand, you're also competing with a lot more games. And you're not competing in a physical storefront, it's digital, which means that also the owners like Valve, Steam, I've read in the news, they prioritize their own games a bit. I'm not firing shots at Valve at all. I'm just kind of seeing what I've read, that at the end of the day, they own this platform. They can do whatever they want. There's no kind of, there's no fairness to it, in the sense that obviously there's an algorithm. Obviously there's a way for games to advertise their games on Steam in a way that's based on certain metrics, like who's clicking on what games are most popular, what genres are kind of doing best. I'm sure there's a whole algorithmic side to it. But at the end of the day, the need is still the same, which is what I find fascinating. Like, you still want to get your game in front of people. You want them to see it. You want them to hear about it. And I love how, whether it's digital or whether it's a physical store like Blockbuster used to be, or GameStop or whatever it was, it's the same thing. Like, it's just moved into a digital format.
It's marketing, right? Yeah. I mean, this is the thing. I remember I went to a GDC talk when indie stuff was growing, right? I won't name names, but so there was a few people on this indie panel at this thing, and it was absolutely packed because this was just when indie was starting to grow. And there's this panel talk, and one of the panelists, who had made lots of money out of their early indie game, said, you don't need marketing. And I really got upset about that, because I was at the back of the room having had reasonable success. I just went, the thing is, I know your game was marketed. You had a big publisher behind you, and literally you sat on that stage talking about your game is marketing. Marketing has been around all of human,
forever.
History, right? The first person who's trying to sell their colored rock would be marketing it in some way, right? They're like, look at this, isn't it great? It's blue.
It's better than that rock.
Better than that rock. This one's blue. Blue? Ooh, you know, and then, you know, they'd be trying to position themselves ahead of the person who's got the other colored rock, you know. And, you know, there's a silly analogy, but you get the general idea. You know, what's a market? You know, what are people doing in a market but marketing their wares, right? It's so daft. And it does upset me when developers who would like to self-publish are told, just make, and this is what they said, just make a great game, right? And it's not fair. It matters massively to make a really good game, but marketing is part of the formula. You can't, you know, you might get lucky. And unfortunately, this does happen. Sometimes somebody who didn't market by fate and fluke, it works, right? It's rare, but it works. And then they can be the next thing that encourages people to not think about how important that is. And that's dangerous, right? Because it's sometimes just pure luck, right? So yeah.
Could I play devil's advocate for a second and
Sure,
just say,
sure.
if you look at content creation, YouTubers, streamers, if your game is good and it gets picked up by one streamer that then starts playing it in front of an audience, and then it gets picked up by another streamer, and it's really good for creating content. It's really good in terms of, like, your game can just have this word of mouth, which used to be physical, but now it's digital across this ecosystem of creators and audience members watching these players play.
Yeah.
Could you argue then that maybe, I'm not saying you don't need marketing, but
I
that
think
the
that's marketing.
but that's not marketing that you necessarily do yourself, right? That just happens because
yes. So you could say, so how did that in that stream of events? How did that very, very, very first person who started the chain of events find that game, right? So you could, and this can happen, of course, they could have just been browsing all of the games, but something made them play that game, right? If it was a plain bit of text with some badly written stuff and a bad image and things like that, they could have scrolled by because there's so much to scroll by. So their very first thing would have been the name, the picture, and the very first few words in the text, which is marketing, right? So getting that just right for that first streamer to click on that very first time is marketing, right? And you could do it. You can put very, very little effort into it. You can put a bit of effort into it, and now you're marketing, or you can put lots and lots of effort into it, in which case you're really, really thinking about how to get that image and the text and the name and everything just right so that somebody is more likely to click on it. It's marketing. So that in that chain of events, totally realistic chain of events, right? And it does happen. It's picked up by somebody, and then it's picked up by somebody, it's picked up by somebody, snowball. But the very first person in that first thing was attracted by something.
Yeah, someone still needs to click on it. They need to download
And
it. They need to try the game.
That could be just a good name. That could just be a genius name, right? Where it's like, well, actually, the capsule image is terrible, the description is terrible, but that name, I couldn't help. Couldn't help but click. And then I was off, and the game's good, and so yeah, I still think these things are very important, and it's all part of it, right? It's all part of it. I think, just being a very, 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 very good dev, but you've got a bland to terrible name, and you've got no ability to create a piece of this tiny capsule image in the first few words to get the ball rolled. I think that's just, it could work. You might be lucky, but I think you've got to, it's an important part of it. But you don't, it's scalable. It's scalable, right? And that's the important thing. So that's why it's a good time, because of course that is scalable. And of course, some people, especially on things like mobile, obviously they put insane amounts of money into marketing because they're playing in even a different flavored, shaped pool of people to try and attract people in there. They're in the mass market. And therefore they have to spend insane amounts of money to get anybody to click and take interest. So yeah, at least I personally, I don't envy them their job, because that's really hard work, right? So it scales.
I want to go back to a comment you made, which was, I'm a control freak. And I feel like if something goes wrong, it's on me. To me, that sounds like a true leader, like a founder. Like you feel a sense of responsibility for how a game does, and you want to, you have to have your hand in every single pot when you're trying to lead a studio or you're trying to grow a game in any regard. Going back to your journey, and kind of you going from Kuju to kind of, from what I understood, creating your own game studio from that, buying out a studio head. How does that play into kind of who you are as a leader, as a control freak, as everything, and then kind of really launching your own thing?
I've said it now, haven't I? I've said it now. God, that's going to be trouble. Yeah, no, I understand that though. It's interesting. It's interesting. So obviously, when you're part of a bigger organization, you've only got so much control, but you can control your environment. People, you can say, okay, well, I have control of myself, right, and what I can do. Right, obviously, somebody's telling me what to do, but within that, and then when you've got a team, you have more that you can control. I know control can be seen such as
Can be seen as a negative, but
well,
we don't mean it in
I'm
that
saying
way.
it's
Yeah.
a positive. I'm just saying, as in, you've got more influence of the world around you, right? You've got more influence of the world around you, so that can grow. And you've like lead art, team lead, producer, exec producer across multiple titles, then studio head, then effectively CEO. Right? That was my growth, and all along those ways, you are getting more and more on you, right? And that can be problematic because you've got, okay, I've got more and more influence and there's more and more I can do and there's more and more that's surrounding me. But actually, obviously, you have to put things in place because you can't do it all. Part of my problem is that I've still got a lot in my brain that says, I think I can do it all. You ask my co-founder at the moment and he'll say, yeah, that's about right. But I'm much more older and wiser and know that I can't. Ish. But like it is something I think is in entrepreneurs a bit, that controlling their environment and the desire to be able to push for what they believe in, and I guess be in charge to some extent. Yeah, it's a very interesting one. We'll probably get into sort of deep psychology about it. But actually, the important thing for me is that as much as I wanted to do that, I love building teams. I love building teams. I love building teams that are having a good time. And I think that one of the things, I guess, is about, again, using control, is that I had less control over that bit aspect. And it gradually grew until actually the last studio and this studio, where really I could really build something which is a vision of what I always dreamt of, if that makes sense. So what did I think when I was at uni? I thought, wouldn't it be great if I had a bunch of people who love to make games, who were kind of a bit like me, who were a bit like each other, who were loving as much as they could their job, who passionate, and they also had hobbies that we could talk about. That's not just games, that we could share and play and so on and so on. A bit like trying to recreate my university life, the fun bit of the university life, but as a job. And it's grown to be more and more like that, whilst, obviously earning money, and supporting family life and all that kind of stuff as well. So and actually, when I think about control, that is an aspect of it where I've been able to learn how to build something that is far more like that dream, right? And the current studio, Absolutely Games, is so much more like that. I mean, Edge Case, which is the studio before, was very close, and this one's even more like, I know it sounds awful, idyllic. And I'm sure some of my team are like, idyllic is a strong word, James, but it's more close to something in my mind of that ideal, right? Of what could be a wonderful studio, because ultimately, what does everybody? Well, not everybody. What do most people want? They want to go to work every day with a skip in their step and go, I'm really looking forward to today. And after the day at work, go, that was a good day, and so on, because you're going to spend most of your life doing this. And, we're very blessed to be making games. You can't just use that as the only thing to hang on to, right? It's got to be more than that. And I think I've learned that as well, right? Just going, well, I make games, so I don't care how much punishment I take and how miserable I am, or the people around me are, because that's dangerous. And that was abused in a lot of the early days of the games industry, where it was like, you guys make games, you should be happy, right? That's not fair or right. And that was caused a lot of trouble, and to this day still causes trouble, I think, with some places. And that's not on, right? There's a lot more to what should make a happy day at work, right? And why you should be happy. And that's, there's much more to it than that.
Paradoxically, even if you're a control freak, I always reference Steve Jobs, because one of the reasons I became a product manager is I read his biography and I was super inspired by it. But what he said that was true, and he was a control freak, he was a perfectionist, you could say he was an asshole, whatever you want. But I think what he understood is that people want to have autonomy over their craft to a certain extent. Like, they want to be able to own the work that they do, that if you're good enough, that you can come into your place of work and you can take decisions, you can justify things, you can move things ahead. And I remember when he was talking about building teams, he wants to find great people that can manage themselves. And that always stood out to me, because the worst experiences I've had personally is when, and a lot of people echo this, is micromanagement. It's when there's too much of a thin line for you to really know what you're doing, and that you just feel like you're going with the motions of what someone else is telling you. And I think the best teams and the best leaders are those that allow people to kind of own their craft. Obviously there are lines, obviously there are guidelines, but if they understand the vision and what they're trying to do, the best people self-manage. That's something he said. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are, because I kind of see that in you. You're trying to build these teams. You're trying to let people have fun. I think within that fun is a component of ownership of what you're doing.
Oh, yes. Now, this is an interesting thing, because what I struggle with, and you mentioned it before, right, is about, again, using control, but the influence, whichever you want to call it, is that I want to create people, have everybody have their own autonomy and so on. But especially in a smaller studio, because, run generally smaller studios, is balancing that against the thoughts that I have as somebody who's not I am a gamer. I've played games. I have thoughts of my own about games and other aspects of it, whether it's the audio or the art. We're all capable of feeding in, right? So it's one of those things that you've got to balance off, right? Because everybody in the studio, and in my studio especially, I want everybody to have opinion on everything if they want to. I don't force to, but so that there's lots of conversation about every aspect of the game. Is it fun? Is it, what about this? I played this yesterday, and I'm sure that that's going to cause a problem, right? Everybody should be able to communicate. So, if somebody was purely autonomous, I think that you've got to give autonomy, but that person has to be the kind of person that is also very open to feedback from everywhere and anywhere and doesn't in any way resent it. Because I've worked with people who are, you give them the autonomy, but then they say, well, it's my right to have nobody feedback because I'm really good, right? And that's like...
That's problematic.
You're still part of a team. You can't get precious, right? You could be precious to a little extent, right? You've got to defend you because you're good at the thing we've employed you to do. But you're part of a team. This is a team effort. Everybody has opinions. It's life, right? And those opinions, right? You can take them or leave them because we're not forcing them on you, but listen, because sometimes there are gems in there. Sometimes there's like somebody was speaking with experience, may have seen something before, right? Especially, in games, you can't play all the games. You can't have seen all the art. But if somebody comes in and goes, thing is, I was playing the thing we just did, and in a game that I played, they did this, which would solve that problem, right? If you say to everybody, leave everybody else alone, it's their job, they're really good at it, don't talk, or you have a singular creative lead who just effectively, they're then the micromanaging those people, and you just do what you're told. I think you can maybe on occasion get absolutely wonderful things, but I think that's actually sometimes causing a lot of the problems we have in the industry, where there's one insanely powerful creative lead. Now, again, sometimes that really, really works. One vision, one lead, and can create something that's incredible. But I think when people try to do that, when it's they aren't capable of it, or it's not set up for it, or the team don't work under those circumstances, because you've got to employ almost for a team like that, you know. I think it can be often seen when those things go wrong, and that's where you get games where, like you said earlier, where maybe they look really good, but there's something not right. You know, I think those cause problems. But you could. The interesting thing for me is, I suppose, when I mentioned about employing for things, is that, and it relates to what we're talking about, is that one of the biggest things that I've learned over my time, and I care about most, is culture and values, right? Is that, you know, from the early days, we were just getting people because they were skilled, right? They're good. Okay, get them in. Look at that. Look at what they've made. That's great. And it meant that we had all kinds of people from all over the place. But what were their internal culture and values, right? And did they fit with everybody else? Now, we didn't even, in my mind, think about that very much for the longest time. And we kept on wondering why some things go wrong, right? What's gone wrong here? Why is the game not as good as it could be? Or the team unhappy? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing that I've done, again, last studio to a good extent, and into this studio a lot, is build a team with an aligned culture and values and be very strict about that. There was an interesting diagram that we used to use a while back, and I use it to this day, which is like quadrants like this, and it's got highly skilled and culturally aligned. If somebody's in the bottom left, whichever one you want to do, bottom left, who is low skilled, low aligned, then they probably shouldn't be there at all, right? If they are high skilled, but not aligned on the culture and values, that's a danger area. Obviously, highly skilled, highly aligned, brilliant, you know, that's great. The interesting one is lower skilled, but highly culturally aligned. Now, those are the people who you can skill up. You can bring them on, right? And they can be your future, you know, wonderful people who are, like, you know, part of the team. So they fit, and the skill is good, but it's not, it could come along, because you can teach skill.
People can learn, yeah.
It's very hard to change somebody, right? Very hard to change somebody, especially when the rest of the people, especially if you've mostly put them into that quadrant or near to, they are becoming more and more and more of a culture who get along well. And they are, if you bring somebody in, I've seen this in other people's studios, they bring in a highly skilled, highly different person who's got a very different culture, and they act like a bad apple. That person might not necessarily be bad. They're made for a different setup or studio or culture, and they come in and it's like just throwing a vial of poison into the room, or a stink bomb, or whatever analogy you want, right? It just goes horribly wrong, because they're just different. And like, maybe they're built for something which is a culture where they're being micromanaged, and they're skilled, but they need somebody to tell them what to do because they don't have independent thought. Or maybe they're built for something where it's very highly competitive between, because there's you know, it's not particularly in my business culture. I haven't come across it much, but there are businesses out there where they'll say, we've got 2 teams or 3 teams, may the best team win, right? You know, and it's like, okay, so it's highly competitive, and that team is the team that's going to get the green light to go on and become the next game that's made, right? That causes things to happen. And some people are good for that culture, and they're like, okay, let's do it. Let's win this. That team's, and they'll use analogies like, that team's finished, they're dead, we're going to do blah, blah, blah. But that's creates, if somebody's come up in that culture and grown in that, then that's part of them, which is part of a highly competitive way of thinking, which is fine and works well in some organizations, needed in some organizations, but again, not mine. On my website, it actually says, absolutely games, no politics, no bullshit. I think it says BS, because my culture is openness, honesty, teamwork, passion, joy, excellence, right? It's those things, right? And it sounds fluffy, and people are like, well, that sounds just like idyllic. It's like, yeah, well, let's try, okay. But that's not for everybody. Some people are like, I don't know, that doesn't sound like what I want. And for me, I believe that we will obviously work towards trying to create success. We will well, hopefully success will come, but I'm not going to sacrifice culture for that, sacrifice culture for that, right? And that's the thing. That's my choice, right? And that's a sort of again, big thing I've learned over time is like, don't sacrifice what's good and what you always wanted, that idyllic, for some level of success. And one of the ways we used to do that, sadly, and I sort of alluded to earlier, was things like crunch, right? We used to just go, well, we've got a good culture. Everybody seems to be really happy. Everything's going well. There's a problem. The deadline's looming. We can't move the date. I know what we'll do. Let's just run everybody into the ground. Let's break the culture for success. And of course, that still happens in places, but it was awful, right? It was awful and did terrible damage to lots of people, and resentment all over the place, and people, holding grudges to this day, and things like that. And I was like, those were lovely people who really enjoyed each other's company. But you stress them out and you make them work late and you deprive them of sleep, and it does terrible things.
How do you keep your finger on the pulse? I imagine you have leads. There's a hierarchy system usually in companies where an art team may be held by an art director and a development director, et cetera, et cetera. So is it the case of, are you going out and speaking to everyone personally, or is it something that you just walk through the office and you get a sense of how people are doing? But how do you know that, especially when maybe you decide to do crunch because you have to? You have 2 days where we just got to.
We just don't do it. No, it doesn't matter.
In general, okay.
Yeah, it's absolutely forbidden. It's actually forbidden. If you're going to do this, you've got to do it. You've got to do it. And I would rather. I mean, it's never happened, because the other thing is that we are. So, one of the ways that people used to say, well, why are we crunching? Sure, it should have been better organized, is to be really good at that, right? And it sounds very boring, but to estimate well and have lots of contingency and be honest about that, right? So we've probably lost deals because we're too expensive. But one of the reasons why we might have added extra money on compared to other people is that money is the contingency, because you're going to change your mind about things. Something's going to go wrong. We're going to want to add things, right? And if you sell somebody, it's going to cost you X and it's going to be out here, and you're lying, right? Or that you've basically gone with your raw estimates, was the way we'd put it. You're kidding yourself that something's not going to happen. I mean, including just team members going off sick or blah, 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 blah. So we've got a formula that means that it's not X, it's X plus an amount for everything. And that means that if you can then get a deal or an amount of money or whatever that is that number, then why would anybody need to crunch? Because you've got your numbers right. Do you see what I mean? And what we used to do, and what people still do to this day, is they might be just very optimistic or whatever. They go with X, not X plus, and it causes all kinds of problems. Right? So I was just going back to the crunch thing to explain, like, no, right? It's just not, and lots, to be fair to lots of other companies are now like, no, we're not doing it. And I get that, some guys who have just left uni, they might be like, well, like, you could call it crunch, but basically we could work any time of day and so on. Crunch is when you have to do it and you're starting to get to the point at which you're damaging life, you're sleep deprived, all those kinds of things. Volunteering because it's your it's your game. I made this game. I'm sitting at home and I put a couple more hours in at the end of the day. That's a different thing. That's than the actual damage that can be. You can see I'm passionate about this.
Yeah. But it's diminishing returns, right? Like, especially when you're going through crunch, like, people get tired, more mistakes get made, bugs don't get found. Like, it almost
It,
always, you're getting more work done, but
I
you're
mean,
tiring everyone out.
it's not. I mean, businesses wouldn't do it or done it if it didn't produce some level of results, right? It does produce results, and it does have some. You could say, well, if you put all these extra hours in, you're only 50% as efficient. But if you put lots and lots and lots and lots of hours in, that 50% will still add up to getting your thing out on time. But is that right? Is that what people should be doing? Just because, in most cases, because they're passionate. Right? It's abusing the passion, right, of people. Right? We're passionate. Why am I doing this? Why are you doing this? Why are so many people doing this? 95% of people in games are doing this because they really want to make games and they love it and they wouldn't want to do anything else. And yeah, sure, they could go and get a much more sensible job and less stress and whatever. But actually, they love it. But don't abuse that. Don't take advantage of that passion. Right? That's not fair. So and it's been done and it still gets done. But yeah.
Do you think there's personal responsibility in controlling that passion as well? Speaking personally, I really get passionate about when I'm building something, working on a project. I have a goal that I've told players I want to deliver. And I think upon reflection, I used to think back and think maybe I could have controlled that passion. Maybe I could have given myself a break instead of working late in the evenings, because looking back, I didn't get anything extra for doing it. No one said thank you. I just did the work because I really believed in what I was doing and I really wanted to deliver for players. But maybe it should have been on me to create that balance, which maybe would have kept me more level. It's a tricky one.
It is a tricky one. And I have paid the price for not getting my work-life balance right. It's caused me harm, right? And I sort of regret some of that. Some of it I had to do, and some of it was definitely my choice. And to the point of unhealthiness, right? So especially if it's yours, your company, your life, you can choose to use it in lots of ways and so on. But again, you've got to work out your effectively work-life balance and be, like you say, there is a bunch of we can say it, I can say it, my own responsibility. Again, what I'm talking about is people who have no choice, right? And that's the thing, right? I have no choice. Now, you could say, well, some people are like, well, they always have choice. They don't have to do it. But there's so much implied pressure on that person that they feel like they have to do it, right? And that's, again, it's grey, but you're abusing that grey, right? So again, that's why it's like you've just got to take a no thing to it. But again, you've always got to look after your own work-life balance, and that's another thing I've learned personally is like looking after that own work-life balance, and then again being strict about it. Right? I'll stand there with my finger on the office alarm, going to, like, if I see somebody sat in the corner going, I just need to do a thing. It's like, come on, do it tomorrow. Shoo, shoo, shoo. Out you go, right? Because it's too easy to say, oh yeah, that would be really good. That'd be really good because I look forward to that. And then you've sort of put pressure on that person. They're like, oh yeah, I better get it done. You've always got to be careful, especially saying things as a boss. That's something I get told and repeated sometimes by other people who say, you realize you're the boss and you think you're just saying something as a colleague, but you are the boss. And they possibly are now, I don't know whether they're supposed to do that thing. Especially some of my leads say that, and they're like, you didn't undermine me exactly, but that person will be now thinking whether they should do that thing.
They'll be second guessing.
Or the thing I've told them that they're supposed to be doing. And I'm like, yeah. And then I will, so there's some nuances like that. So it's an interesting one.
It goes back to that autonomy, right? Like you want to, as a boss, you want to be able to go to a colleague, give them kind of your perspective. If it's a hard line, you make that clear. But otherwise, you're bouncing off ideas. You're telling them, look, this is how I see it. How do you see it? And there's that trust that the right decision will be made because the vision is clear. What you want to deliver for players is clear. I think when everything is very clarified at a top level on what we're trying to do, those conversations can happen and there's no second guessing. I mean, this is me and my idyllic, like,
Yep.
thought of this is how it could work if
Yep.
I had to lead a studio or if I had to manage a team. As long as everyone knows what the goal is that we're trying to achieve, we can have open conversations, we can have debates, we can have discussions, and then no one leaves second guessing because we've just shared our thoughts.
Yeah. And there's a couple of things to that. There's one which is I insist on these days at the beginning of a project is really working up what the vision is and being aligned on that, especially seeing as I said, we don't have a let's call it an authoritarian creative director like that person. Everybody else just has no thoughts.
like a Hideo Kojima.
Yeah, we don't have that.
Yeah.
So what if we're going to have to all, as a cluster, including potentially our publisher as well, know we need to spend a good bit of time at the very beginning of the project agreeing what this is, agreeing what this project is, what's the vision, how long is this going to take, who's going to be involved, but especially the vision, right? The vision, because that helps with what you said. And then the other thing is culturally, right? So culturally, again, the team getting to know who I am and who all the other people are, to know that it's, again, it slightly sounds idyllic, but this is what I work towards, is that they know the difference between when I'm saying that thing, we do need that by next week because it's a marketing image and we've just got to do it. Right? Just got to do it. Drop what you're doing, got to do it because something's happening. Something's happening. And me just saying, when I was playing it yesterday, I did think that icon was a bit confusing, and them going, sure, that's your opinion, and knowing that I'm just as a player, and I say things like that sometimes, or just say, look, it's just my opinion. It's not important. But of course, there's still always that slight insinuation. But if people know me better, and of course, some of the people I've worked with years, and they are quite capable of saying, shut up, James, or, going, look, just leave me to it. It's my job. And I'm like, yeah, all right, okay, that's fine,
Yes,
fine.
That's a sign of a good team. Yes.
Yeah, well, they're like, it's my job. Trust me. And I'm like, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, you're right. And I'll say things and I'll throw things out there. And some of the people, again, who've worked with me for years go, because I will throw ideas out there, but they're quite happy to say, that's a terrible idea, James. But I don't, as part of my personality, I will throw ideas out there because I know that there is a hit rate to anything. And sometimes I'm like, I'm pretty confident that this is a thing, and sometimes it will get picked up, and we'll go, actually, yeah, that is the solution, that is the problem, or the problem or the solution, problem with the solution, or whatever. Because as a experienced person, sometimes you still have the experience to bear, and you can say, I think this could be a solution to that thing, and that's fun, right? So it's fun on the days when I can go home and think, I've made that better. I think, hopefully better. Can't be sure, But sometimes I go home and go, yeah, all I did was, sometimes, unfortunately, all I've done was spend time with, let's say, one of the game designers talking about a couple of ideas, and they've gone, there's both of those things just not going to work, because often they know the mechanics underneath, and they're like, it just doesn't work like that. And I've gone, and I don't mind being wrong. I don't mind being wrong, and failure is all part of that. And I know it sounds cliche, but that is part of the growth. But yeah, again, not in the state of just going around going, well, I'm right, and just do what I say. That's just not, I don't think you'd have many people working for you. Maybe you would some places, but yeah, not the kind of people I'd want to work with.
What about on the inverse? I think every great manager, every great leader has to be able to say no, has to know how to say no. Because like we mentioned, if you say yes to too many things, there's scope creep. The publisher comes in, we need this. Development team says we should get this. All of a sudden you say yes to a lot of things, and now you're overstretched. Your original vision is getting muddier. I think a key skill is to be able to say no respectfully and kind of hold down what you think is most important. And there's a skill in doing that. Like that happens in product management, that happens in production. Like what's your take on that?
That's a very interesting one. So obviously, on an individual level, I can do an amount of that. I do an amount of that at times. However, I think in a team, or certainly from my experience for quite a long time now, you take on roles. And this isn't about being a CEO and, managing the books. And I mean, we haven't even talked about like, cash flow and, learning the balance sheets and to keeping the shareholders happy, all these kind of things, and whenever I said about going from a studio head to running your own company, HR, right. So we're talking about games mostly, but like there's all that going on. So if you just put that to one side and just say, as somebody who is running a games company, think about games and, small companies are therefore you're involved in the game a lot, and the relationships with the publisher, as you said, is that what I've often done is have a really, really good partner. And I think it helps me a lot as who I am, right? Is a really good partner that I will have that has pretty much, just sit opposite, right? An opposite number. And that partner, funnily enough, often is the person who is more likely to be the no person. Because I know that I am quite capable of probably being the person that would gradually overscope something, like go, oh, we should do that, because I'm pushing hard for an ideal, right? Because you mentioned it, perfectionism, right? So I can be a perfectionist and go, if we had that could be a little bit more on the review score and because players are having more fun. If we had that could be a little bit more. That could be a little bit more. But you can only do so much. And what I generally have is somebody who's the person, or people who sit in the room and all shake their heads at me, right? And I don't mind. I do mind, but I don't mind. I don't really mind, because also I need to push back sometimes. I need to go. I know you say no, but this is really important. I'm serious face now. That this is important. This is important. This bit of the company agrees that is important. I know you've said no. How are we going to do it without compromise, without crunch, right? Without the answer being, oh, we have to crunch then, right? Which in the past sometimes was the solution. It's like, well, let's look at what else is in the plan. Is there something that we thought was lower priority that we don't have to do? So the initial response might be no, and then it's like maybe, and some of the response might be like, well, we're probably going to have, this is big enough, we'll probably have to get another person in. This is going to cost money, right? Because the solution can be just, well, we need to, that's going to take some months, so that we need to find money. And right, it's like, have we got some spare budget? Can we put our own money into it? What can we do? Because I, as the person who would say no, appreciates that I suppose that is important. And if you real passionately see about this, and some of the team also do, maybe we do have to get this in because it matters. It matters enough. And that happens as well, right? So, but like you say, there's plenty of knowing going on, and me being grown up enough to go, yeah, okay. It wouldn't it have been glorious if, but strike it out of the notebook, go, yeah, that would have been nice. But, and then you just say, flippant things to each other and go, we'll be in the sequel. It's fine, and like hold on to that little dream,
And I think for people listening, what I'm hearing from you is that there's an element of really knowing yourself, like that good cop, bad cop dynamic that you had with your partner, where that at a visionary, idyllic standpoint, you want to say yes. Like if someone comes to you with a great idea, you want to be able to say, yeah, we'll put it in the backlog. Let's try to fit it in the roadmap. But knowing that you might need another person to be a bit more the bad cop, the one who says no, I think that's a sign of, I think just knowing yourself, like knowing kind of what you're good at, what you kind of, where your tendencies might go towards. That's a sign of leadership. No one can be perfect at everything. And being able to say, I have a partner that can help me with this, that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and I really, really appreciate the people I work with and the partners that I work with. I mean, everybody I work with, but like the partner I work with, who we can have that absolutely honest, brutal conversation. Ultimately, at the very, very end of the day, seeing as I, hold the badge across the top of my head that says CEO, I have to make decisions. And sometimes those decisions, I just, and there is a bunch of that, everybody has had a long debate. They look at me and go, well, which is it? And I go, it's D. Like, it's we've gone through 4 options. I've listened to everybody. I've got my own thoughts. D is it. And everybody's like, okay, right, let's make D happen, right? And it's like, okay, these are the options. And there is a lot of making decisions. And you don't know they're right. I mean, obviously that's the chaos of life and the various chaotic effects. You don't know they're right. You've just got to use as best everything being informed by your team, being informed by experience and all this kind of thing to say, yeah, that's the one we're going to have to go for in this situation. Sometimes, it's not what you thought. But you've learned something and you come out of the room and go, yeah, I wouldn't have gone with D. And I think D was not my favorite walking into this room, but that's the right answer. And that is, again, that is a growth thing, right? Is understanding. I think there's a lot of understanding yourself. I've got my Stoic philosophy little thing that I got for Christmas. I like Stoic philosophy, and it like reminds you of things like that, because you got to remind yourself about things like this every day. And I think it's interesting that I think that some people might argue that these things that we've talked about mean that you can't. I don't know whether it's true. You can't be or you're less likely to be the crazy success, right? Because I think sometimes crazy success sit behind more extreme people sometimes. But I'm okay with that now, right? If sometimes in the past it's like, why have I not been that? And then I look at some of the personalities involved, and they're just very different to me and my philosophy of life, right? And it's like, well, some of us can't be. Well, I'm trying to think of an example. Can't be that. I'm trying to think of some particularly out there rock star that got all the attention, or pop star. Some of us can't be that person that's people go, wow, they're crazy, and this is great, their success because of their uniqueness and bold attitudes and potentially high risk taking as well, right? There's an element of risk. I'm much more of a risk taker than most of my business partners, which is another part of the how did I get to where I am and so on. Is there's been a chunk of rolling the dice, right? I'm still doing it, right? I put a good chunk of money into the new business that I made off the last business into this business, so I'm still rolling the dice. I've got a book, actually, interestingly, signed by Ian Livingstone, one of his books, where he said, "Keep rolling the dice, James," in the front, because I know him a bit, and we were having a chat about making games. They sort of succeed, but like not massive success. So you basically keep rolling the dice with studios and games, and then, because I said there's an element of luck. Like, will you come up with that nat 20? Maybe you will, maybe you won't, but you've got to keep trying. And that's another thing I've learned in this industry is to, like when things don't work out how you wanted, is to, stand up, get yourself off, brush the dust off, try again. I think some people find that very hard and they give up. And a lot of people use the metaphor of like, just give up and go get a job. Where they mean, fit into a larger organization and just don't keep trying. And I nearly did that at one point, but I just can't. I've just got to keep rolling the dice.
You need to keep doing your own thing. Talk to me about the financial side of things. I personally am not as versed in financing a studio and getting investment in all the cash flow issue. But more than that, I'm saying this because you mentioned risk. And when I think of risk, it does come down to those factors. I mean, there are also other ones like culture cohesion, picking the right game, but it always comes down to, I have X budget. I have to make Y amount of revenue to break even or make a profit to keep this whole train going. What is that like?
Well, so the thing is that there's different financial models. That sounds very sophisticated. Basically, different things have happened over time. So let's say in the early days of or let's call it work for hire, right? Because that's my first part of the games industry, and still doing it now and then, is something where basically you've pitched a thing, or a thing's been pitched at you. Like the publishers sometimes do, by the way, come across and say, we would like this making, right? And this is the idea and so on. It's their idea. They've come up with it. They'd like you to make it. So it's like, it's work for hire. So you'll still have to go through the exercise of like, what is it? Let's try and work out in detail. What's that going to cost and timeline? So then at that point, you've got an amount of budget to make a thing, right? And that is sort of different from when you've got investment in a business, right? So when you've got an amount of money to make a thing, you are going, okay, with that. And by the way, we are, as an industry, which computers are people, right? So it's like the computers are relatively cheap, although RAM's making them more expensive at the moment, but they're relatively cheap. And people. So it's people, right? So it's how many people are on the project for how long, right? So that's your budget, right? That's it. People. So therefore, if something you've underestimated something, you're going to need more people or more time, or again, comes back to crunch, right? Because that's the thing that can be busted. So that is like managing that through. And like, there's all kinds of project management stuff we could get into, because early days I was doing a lot of project management type stuff in those projects to try and make sure that we hopefully understood the management of that team as much as possible, and react to everything and look when things are going to go wrong and go, oh God, the critical part's broken, what are we going to do? All that kind of stuff. One of the big problems we had in the early days, and I still think it's the case, is that because of box product again and attitudes, a street date was very rigid, because the build up towards that point was much more complicated, right? Because you've got a factory ready, you've got trucks ready, you've got a store ready, you've marketed the game possibly quite far in advance. So it's like, it will come out this November. And by the way, the clock's on like when things should happen, obviously Thanksgiving, etc., big one. Like, it will come out this November. So you've got a fixed budget and an absolute deadline, right? So what's going to give? And obviously, funnily enough, again, that created a lot of crunch, because there is one of the better things about these days is because you've got digital distribution, you can potentially, if you've got enough foresight, move things around a little bit and potentially move your release date around a little bit if things haven't worked out as they're supposed to, or if you want to add scope. Because one of the other things these days I've actually found is there's much more, well, for us at least, open, honest discussion of like, okay, we could make this game 10% better, right? You get a 10% better review score. This is very, it doesn't work like this, but let's say that's the simplification. And the publisher goes, yes, we could make it 10% better. And you go, it would cost you this much money to make this 10% better. Or if it's a shared thing, it will cost us this much money to make it 10% better. You can have that open conversation, discuss whether we shouldn't do it, and extend the time, and, and like, therefore make a better game, and all this kind of thing. I think that's become much more rational, which is good. Anyway, that's one aspect of finance, which is project funding. Obviously, if it's your project that you funded, almost simpler, right? But you've got other models where you've got, I won't go into all the models. Right. Okay, let's go to a simpler one. Let's go to company investment. So company investment is different because basically what you've done is you've taken money from people who are going to take a stake in your business and, probably take some equity for an amount of money. And that's a much longer term thing. They're not betting on a project, they're betting on the company with, either, well, and or dividends and or exit as their final journey, right? With them not knowing exactly what that's going to look like, but they're do after that. Now, with publishing, again, there's so much we could talk about with publishing. Often you're pitching that idea we talked about earlier. You pitch the idea, and then and so on and so forth. With raising equity, you're pitching the business, right? And you're pitching yourselves as leaders of a business that will have value and grow. So it's much more about you, your business, etc. And these are often very different people. Initially, it's going to be, it could be people you know even in the family. It's like rich uncle so and so. I know somebody who's like pitched to their rich uncle and got their first investment. But it could be like a love investment, and it could be angels, which are like, especially in our industry, quite often people who've made good money in the industry who are interested. There are angel groups who are non-industry who can invest, but you're pitching to them about the business vision and how you're going to grow as a business and how you're going to sustain and how reliable you are and so on. And then I have actually raised money through VCs, and that is like even more about the business, and they want bigger, higher growth generally. And you're talking about another level of professionals, so people that you're going to be pitching to who are going to look much more into the business in depth. And I've done that. Again, they are going to be very bluntly saying, we are looking for an exit, and we want an exit in X years, right? So we want to turn this much money. Let's say they say, oh, we're going to put $1 million into your business. We want it to be preferably 20 million in X years or something. So they want 20X or whatever. Now they know that it may do that. It may do better. It may do worse, but like they've got a portfolio. So they're playing a numbers game, but that's another thing. And then I've also raised, what's called strategic investment, which is investment of largish amounts of money from some, maybe another company that is also in the industry, which can help boost your business and so on. So I raised money from a Chinese company into EdgeCase, and that was, again, that's for another day. Got a long sort of China story, but we raised money from China into EdgeCase and raised that strategic investment alongside some VC money. And again, the thing about this is each time you have more people who are looking to you to make this a success, and potentially the bigger the money, the more they're going to be wanting to spend time to make sure, right, and understand how it's going and so on. So effectively, if you've only got a small amount of investors early stage, or you've only taken on so much investment, you're producing the odd report for your shareholders and saying this is what's going on. When you get a VC on board, you have a board, and you have monthly board meetings, and you have a chairman potentially, and it becomes much more serious, for good reason, right? So there's that. And then ultimately, I am not the best person at like sitting there and looking at the balance sheet detail. So basically what the accountant produces at the end of each year. But boy, can I do a good business plan and cash flow forecast that I've been pretty good at getting right enough, in the future, where I go, this is what's in the bank. And look, I predicted that this would be in the bank 6 months ago, and it's in the bank, and, all that kind of stuff, because we've been life and death for the company many times over the years, where it's like, I think we might run out of money here. What are we going to do? Right. And you have to, you can't bury your head in the sand. Right. So you act, right? You try and work out every possible way that you can make sure that doesn't happen. And that's legally doesn't happen. And, you duck and dive and you work things out, right? You take a small loan off the shareholders, you delay paying the tax for a month, which is allowable, like, because you just say, well, we're going to be able to get it here because we're getting some money come in. You go and see if you can get another deal from somebody, see if a deal or you can get this pushed up. There's lots of different ways, but yeah, there's been some pretty scary moments, but the only way that you deal with that is by having very clear future forecasting, so you can see it coming. You've got to know it's coming. You can't ignore it. And that was one of the funny things when I changed from, well, it wasn't that funny, but when I changed from a studio head to a company owner, was that I built what's called a P&L, which is very much, this is what's I think will happen per month but the month, that's not real, right? I haven't built a cash flow forecast. And when I built a cash flow forecast that says, oh, by the way, the money from Sony doesn't come in for this many months, and the money from this this publisher doesn't come in for this many months, you suddenly go, oh, we've got no money at that point. Suddenly it goes to a minus, and you go, oh dear. And that was a funny, not funny moment when I realized that we actually were going to go bust, and we'd only just got started. And that's because I hadn't built a proper cash flow forecast. So, you learn these things. But yeah, you have to get involved in money management. I luckily happen to quite like spreadsheets. So weird work, I quite like a spreadsheet. Not too complicated, not too many formulas, but I do like a spreadsheet because they help me think about, visualize future scenarios, right? And that's really important because in my job, I'm often I have to be the person in this business that's the most forward thinking. There's people making the games that we've signed today. Right? They're making these games, or the game that we want to make, they're making that today. And they can see for this year, say, we're making these games. I'm sitting there going, yes, but next year, what are we going to do? And they're going, well, what does that matter? And I'm going, well, somebody's got to think about it. So I'm thinking next year or the year after, what are we going to do then? And spreadsheets help me know what I need to do for then. But yeah, I have to be the most forward-thinking person in the business, which means the way you could describe it is worrying about the future. Which I'd rather not worry about the future all the time, but it's my job, right? It's my job because I care so much about the thing that I've built and the people there that I want to make sure that this survives and thrives and grows and hopefully is a success into the future.
You're protecting a company. You're protecting the livelihoods of the people that are working for you. It's a great burden. It's a great responsibility. I'm going to ask a question which may seem naive, but I've seen a lot of game studios do this. How do you avoid losing your soul when you start getting into VC partnerships? You start getting a board. You start getting a lot of executives that are looking for packages to, like you said, there's a cycle that one big VC or a conglomerate will buy the game studio and then look to make an exit in 3 years and X percentage revenue on top of it, right? Because you want to resell it for more. How do studios avoid losing their souls when they need to prioritize revenue above all else? So much in game development is about long-term investment, thinking about what's right for the game, what makes it more fun, what will get people to play longer, especially the people who have kind of committed themselves to that game and are playing loyally. I've just seen a lot of studios end up prioritizing, I think even from player perspectives, they look at it and think, it just feels like this studio's trying to make a buck. They have a great game, but it's no longer about the game. It's more about maximizing that revenue because I don't want to make it sound negative. And again, I could be entirely naive about this, but it sounds like you're making a deal with the devil. You get a big cash injection, but we expect a big return, and so you have to go full speed.
Yeah, I think that it depends on, again, who you are and who your team are and why you've been invested in, right? So, and more things, right? So let's say if I was a VC and I'd invested in something that is being pitched to me as we're going to build a money-making machine game, right? I would want them to deliver on the thing they pitched, which is a money-making machine game, right? So this is where, say, for example, you invested in a mobile free-to-play game some years back. You'd be like, you've described a thing that could potentially be insane, right? So as a VC, you've invested in that, and that's what you asked for. So it's very open and honest. If you're a VC that had invested in a team that are, and this happens less because of this, right? That say we are extremely creative, we have shown success before, we are going to be more successful through this next thing. They are going to be more left to their creative selves because their success, let's say their success came through their creativity and skill and the quality of that they made. So I think the VC is putting pressure on them to do the thing that they said they were going to do. Now, if there is signs of failure, I'm just sort of empathize from the other side. If there's signs of failure for either thing, then they're going to say, but you said you could do this. So let's say the free-to-play company, it's like, it's just not working. They're like, you said you were going to do this. And the thing is, if something's not working, that means the money's going down. They're running out of money, right? So it still comes back to money. If the creative company's not working, that's possibly after it's come out, right? It's just like, it didn't work. What are you going to do next? Because you still need to try. We still need to try and make this work. I think there's different pressures at different times on those particular instances, because what should they do at that moment when it didn't work? Because if it does work, then I don't think the pressure is there per se. It's an interesting one, because you could argue, right? Even if it unfortunately, not entirely, but for quite a few companies, especially on their first game, or at least if they're just sort of running at a ticking along, it's still going to come back to money. Because even if I'm making a smallish game with a smallish studio and we're just ticking along, I want to make sure everybody is paid so that they can enjoy their lives, because I'm sitting there going, these are people that I've got to know really, really well, and that I want them to be able to have a nice, flourishing life, right? They should have the enjoyable life that I have. So therefore, if somebody's even quite got a small game and they look like they're trying to make a buck, they might be trying to make a buck because they know that they want to feed the team next year, and they're actually quite small. But I know what you mean when you're probably looking more at big companies that look like they don't need the money and then but trying to make a buck.
They're squeezing the lemon. That's how it looks to me. Like you've got a great game, you've got a loyal fan base of people playing, and you get a bunch of people coming in, and they're looking to make an exit, and they're looking to make a lot of money for themselves at the expense of raising prices, of doing more features that perhaps are more short-term in terms of pumping up a certain number because that's what you're trying to sell the company on. I think there are a lot of dynamics that I think I speak for a lot of people, especially players, people who love games, that just look at these great companies and think something's not right. On paper, it looks great, but then there are delays. There are decisions that go against the ethos. And I get games as a business. It's like any other one, right? Like that's why, I'm coming from a very naive standpoint, maybe far too idealistic, and I'm not kind of drilling you for an answer at all. It's more me existentially kind of really trying to understand, like, what is if gaming is an art form and everyone's so passionate, and it's unlike anything else because you buy a tech product, that product delivers a specific function. A game is communicating with your friends. It's filling up time by doing something that's fun for you. It's more ephemeral. It's different. So,
well, it's escapism. Like I said, it's escapism.
Escapism. That's a great one.
Escapism at the very pinnacle, and that's like different levels of fun and etc. I was talking to somebody the other day about if they're playing a very simple clicker game, they're still, even though I said, how fun is it? And they had to really think about that hard. I said, doesn't matter. It cannot be that fun. But if it's creating the escapism that you want, that's fine, right? If you were sat there going, I just didn't think about work for half an hour. It's like, and they said, I think, I actually kind of felt kind of good. It's like, that's fine. It doesn't have to have millions of mechanics and be super fun per second, right? You can, it still goes under the title game because there is some game in there that you had, like there is a bit of gameplay in there, but for some of it, you were just away, right? Fine, great. You had pleasure and you had escapism. That's fine. So just getting off onto one, but so I think in terms of, like squeezing the lemon you talked about, I think some of this comes back to, and I'm going to go roll around again into sort of culture and value. This is probably more values, right? Who are you and who are these people? And I think there's a lot of people in this industry, again, a lot of people in this, and it is great. And I have met people who've gone to other creative industries and come straight back and gone, oh my God, there's a lot of people in this industry who are just lovely, right? They're just lovely, and they just want to make games. And I don't mind saying it, just a bunch of nerds trying to make games, and some people who are really passionate about their particular aspect of that. All kinds of things, make or publish or be part of the industry, and just get on with each other and have a lovely time. And they're just so nice. Lots of people are so nice. It's not everybody, though. It's not everybody.
It is not.
Somebody used an analogy for me once upon a time, and they said, there's dolphins and sharks. There's a lot more dolphins, but there's sharks. I was like, oh, yeah. Because I'd been fortunate enough to live in quite a bubble of mostly pretty much dolphins for the longest time. So maybe, again, only living in my bubble, maybe what you're experiencing sometime is like something gets so successful that the sharks have attached themselves to it. Sharks. The people who attach themselves to it, who go, okay, step aside, creatives, now's my time, right? And they're like, we're gonna make money, right? And they're not the exaggerated, but the auteurs, the creatives that made the thing that you initially loved, right? Maybe, right?
Yeah,
and
sharks,
again, I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know what happens in things, but like, and that person is just going, well, I'm doing what we're doing what has to be done because it's a business, and we've got shareholders and right. But in our world, we could possibly say, and sometimes this is very true. My team says sometimes it's like there are other ways that mean that you'll be more popular, which means you will make that money, but via a different route, not having to do that thing, right? Because that thing is easy, but it will do damage in the long term. And it's like, yes, that's interesting. And you go, therefore, and obviously that's another. It's a gamble that potentially just looking after your players is going to be a long-term payoff. For example, that's an example, right? Like looking after them and going, look, we'll just put out a whole bunch of free stuff, make the game better and better and free, and is going to pay off. Yeah. So again, another long topic we could talk about
for
like
ages. Yeah.
Again, it's like its approach. It's again, it does come back to sort of values to some extent about that, but also it's going to be complicated because we don't know whether that company actually really has to make the quarter work, right? And if they don't, they're out, right? So we don't know. You don't know that. And like those people, and there's people with jobs and they've got families, and it's like, okay, yeah, we don't know. Yeah,
we don't know. On one hand, you need to look out for people's livelihood. You have a company, you have a lot of people who depend on this job to provide for their family. That is the truth of the matter. At the end of the day, it's like there are people at the top that need to take tough decisions to keep the company going. But at the same time, there are people, middle managers, all the way up the chain, that justify the deal with the devil, the deal that we're going to deliver X% of revenue in this amount of time. And they justify it as this is the way it has to be. And it starts watering down what the game used to be because, and it's not like these profits will go, and I don't want, I'm sounding like a revolutionary, but it's not like these profits bleed down the whole organization. It usually goes up to a number of executives that get an exit package and off they go. And that's where I think a lot of gamers are suspicious, because it's a tricky one, and it's not every company's the same, and everyone's different. And I may be taking the harshest example, but there is an element of that I think a lot of players see.
Yeah, and we're in a high visibility world now, right? So, would we have even noticed that in Hollywood in the 60s? No, because nobody knows what's going on in the world. It's just like, oh, this is going on. We know about lots of things. We know about many things. So we have a high level awareness. Gamers have a high level of awareness. Gamers talk to each other because they have the skill and the tech to chat through every mechanism. So we have a high level awareness. So, beware being that company that makes that bad move. And we see them, right? Those errors,
We
and they
hear
go,
them, yeah.
oh God, that was a really bad move. And we can see exactly why you did it. We know, you know, and sometimes, I guess, sometimes, again, like I don't know, but sometimes they have to take those decisions. And sometimes it comes down to a choice, a matter of choice. I guess, like I said, back to values, like what choice would I make? And I'm not in all those situations, but certainly for myself, I will, and when I'm talking with my business partners, I'll come down on the choice that means that we maintain the values and culture that we said we want to be, maybe at the sacrifice of something that could turn into a success, right? Like I said, you could sit there and go, well, we will crunch, or this next game, we think that it should be priced at this, because we could get an extra few dollars, and then that's a massive mistake, right? But actually, or we could we could make this update free or paid, or, yeah, or it could be even something in the game mechanics, which comes down to, people basically making something which is, I suppose, sort of manipulative. I mean, again, I'm not doing free to play games, but like there's certainly things in there that start to become, psychology and playing with people in a
Dark
different way than
tactics.
entertainment.
Yeah.
It's which is fascinating, because I love thinking about how the human brain works. But it's, we are thoroughly sticking on the we just want to entertain people side of the line, and keep people entertained. Yeah, fascinating as that world is, that's where we are right now, which is again is part of values and so forth, value choices.
For people listening in that want to build a game studio someday, what skills matter most? What advice do you have for people?
So sometimes we talk about this at shows and things. I think you could be. I'll start at the beginning there. So one of the things is, if you're going to build a game studio, is unless you happen to have enormous backing and a chunk of money and so on, is that at some point probably you're going to need to get out there and talk to other people. So I always say networking is really important. And it might be, well, that's the life you've lived, so you would say that. But I think it is really important, because it opens so many doors to be confident enough to get out there and talk to people. And, I'm not some extremely confident person, but I've made myself do these things. And sometimes I find it actually very exhausting to go out there and be at a networking event full of people and chatting away. And, and I'm getting older, so, it's just extra exhausting. But, like, it makes such a huge difference to your possibility of succeeding and success. One of the big things that I've found through my experience is that, I suppose I would say, you never know. So when, for example, I raised the Chinese investment, that was a Yuki event that I was sort of not supposed to be at, but they said, oh, there's one more slot, why don't you go along? And it's like, well, it's not, it doesn't even make sense for me to be there, because the people there are mostly looking for mobile games, and we're a PC company. But I went there, and I could have not gone. And my business partner at the time said, that sounds like a waste of your afternoon. And I went, well, you never know. And it turned into a huge investment. Long story how, but like these things, say, for example, it's going and meeting publishers, meeting companies that, if you were going to self-publish, that are potential PR companies that you might work with one day, meeting outsourcers, meeting. And of course, that helps you with your understanding of how it all works and how these things are interconnected, and fills up your contact book for when you might need these things. I think that makes a big difference to the possibility of sustainable success, by having those those connections, and helps you weather the hard times, right? When things have been hard this last while, having those strong connections, and by the way, having those strong connections with people who also, and I'm going to go back to it yet again, sorry, appreciate that you are true to yourself, that you are open and honest, that they trust you, because it's all about relationships. And like I said, there are sharks, but a lot of dolphins, and those dolphins want to know that you are not a shark. And then they'll want to, assuming that they are of that type, they want to do business, right? So they're like, oh, I'd like to do business with you. I'd like to do something with you. Let's try and work something out, So, I would say it matters massively about that. Now, networking is one thing. Really boringly, you've got to get your spreadsheets out. You've got to sit there and build some spreadsheets.
Know your numbers.
You've got to do some numbers work, because if you're going to build studios and projects and so on, you've got to do your numbers, and that goes anything from understanding a bit of project management and estimation, and, as I said, contingency, that people always forget, but you got to have lots of contingency, because it's creative, right? Creative things you don't know, right? It's very unlikely you're going to really, 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 really know everything from the beginning that is going to be exactly correct to the end. So you need lots of contingency. And then finances, right? Finances. Eventually, when you get a bit further along, you're going to have to learn a bit about some law and some HR and things like this, but, not everything, so don't panic. Like going back again, the other thing that's, I suppose, is really, well, not suppose, it is really important, is what do you want this studio to be? What is your vision of it? So at the beginning of this particular one of Absolutely Games, I sat down with Adrian and discussed what we wanted to be, what we want to focus on. One of them is the culture values piece, but the other thing is literally the strategy. Right? What do we want to be? And I sit there and say, I want to be a studio that concentrates on strategy and strategic games, broad church, that eventually has multiple projects on the go, that is not trying to scale to a super huge size, right? So there's also knots in there. We're not trying to become, 1,000 people or something daft. That's not the goal. That we want to create games that entertain people for the long term. Effectively, our vision is to build things that become people's hobbies, because I think actually something that becomes people's hobbies is when you win, because that's effectively, it's a much more engaged audience, right? Hobby is a win, right? These are hobbies. Behind me, people talk about their hobbies. They can't sleep because they're thinking about their hobbies. A game might be something that's quite transient, but if you can build something that becomes a hobby, that's much better. It's complicated, difficult, but that's one of our visions, is how do we build a game that becomes somebody's or people's hobby, and so on. So that's a strategy, that's a vision for the studio. So if you're we want to build a games company, okay. What's your vision? What do you want it to be? What kind of things do you want to build, right? It only can be 5 bullet points, because you need to agree on that as whoever you are, or the founders, and then, stick it on a Post-it note and keep it to one side and go, this is what we said we were going to be. And it might change, by the way. Plenty of studios have pivoted along the way because it didn't work. It doesn't make sense. The market's changed, all that kind of stuff. Pivots happen. But vision. So what we talked about, jumped around a bit. I probably shouldn't have gone straight to networking, but it is important. But anyway, vision, understanding about numbers and money, putting a strategy in place, culture and values piece, maintaining sustainable growth. If you do find that you do need to grow, don't grow too fast. Too fast growth is dangerous. I do actually have a whole number of slides on this, by the way. I did a presentation on things I have learned, but these are all, very important. But I think for that one person, or those two people who are thinking, let's start this, I think this is going to sound like the know yourself, is to think about who they are. So let's say there's a couple of people who are we and what do we want? What's our ideal, right? And who are we, and does that fit? So that you've always got that strong vision in place of what you're trying to get to. Because there's no good writing all these things down and going, we're the wrong people to do this. It's like, well, you probably should start again and write something else down, because you're going to need to stick to that vision on the hard days, right? So, yeah.
I always find it funny though. A company spend a lot of money coming up with a great vision statement for what they do, and then you go down towards the employees and you talk to everyone and no one resonates with it. And that's how hard a vision is to get it right. Like a vision at the end of the day aligns everyone towards a common goal. It actually, and if that vision works internally, externally customers get that sense as well. It's like, they're out doing this.
Yeah.
And I just find it so funny that you'll have gaming companies that have like these huge vision statements on their website, but it's more marketing. I know we need marketing, and we've talked about marketing, but like the true purpose of a vision statement is to align everyone to the point where the product speaks for itself, that the customer just looking at it understands what they're trying to do. So I'm really glad we got to talk about vision, because we've talked about so much. And in the back of my head, I was like, do we have time for vision? And you brought it up yourself, which I'm super glad.
Well, I'm glad we got there. I mean, God knows, we could talk forever. I think we could definitely talk for a very long time about many subjects. Now, vision is very important. I do appreciate in very, very large companies, right, trying to get everybody to agree. Hard work, right? Hard work to agree. But like, yeah, I do. You do see vision and value statements that are sort of stuck above the door on a website, and you read that and you go, that's not the people I've heard about. It's got to come from and be made by the leadership, with the rest of the people in mind, and then talk to the people in the team or company about that, and so on and so forth. Go around many loops to get that thing to be true to the organization. But yeah, doing that, it's better to be done at the beginning and then build a company around that vision than 6 years down the line, when you're, we're a 1,000-man company with multiple successes, go, right, we should have a vision statement, yeah. And then it looks fake, right?
It doesn't feel right. There's no foundation to it.
Yeah. I think you're almost better off having somebody almost from outside going, let's just commission them to write what they think your vision is, because that would be quite interesting and telling, wouldn't it? They possibly don't want to know what that is, because it might be not make them very happy. These are, again, another important part of setting up a studio. And like I say, at the very beginning, is as you grow, make sure that the people that grow around you fit with everything that you have set out in terms of vision, values, culture. The games you want to make. Don't rush that. It's one of the things that's gone wrong for so many people, is rushing that, or just choosing the wrong person, right? Because it's, again, what are we? Computers and people. You've got to get the right people, and you've got to be the right people who are going to look forward to every day when they come to work together.
We are but computers and people. James, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. I've kept you here for, I think this might be the longest episode. So for anyone listening, I think we've gone well past the 2-hour mark. But it's been incredible to listen to and hear your advice.
I should get on with some work.
I think both of us. But thanks again for coming on.
It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm sure we'll talk again about some of the things we didn't cover, which is probably for another
so
day.
Much more. Absolutely,
For another day.
Absolutely.
Been a pleasure.